right, welcome to Hoops Tonight here at The Volume. Happy Tuesday, everybody. Hope all of you guys are having a great week. Well, we are going to be diving headlong into the NBA draft today, which is tomorrow. It feels like the NBA Finals were yesterday, and here we are. The draft is already about to take place. I can think of nobody better than Mr. Sam Vecenie, my good friend, somebody that I trust as a basketball mind more than most. But I know I'm gonna come off as pandering here, but I think he's the very best at covering the draft as well. In addition to diving into it year round, he also gets the players themselves on his show with him. They go over tape together. He picks their brain. It's an incredible just an incredible process that he goes through to properly cover the draft. If you guys haven't checked out his draft guide yet, you have to. If you're not following or subscribing to his YouTube channel yet, you need to. But Sam, I'm really excited to get into this draft today. I was telling you before we started the show that this is one of the hardest shows that I've ever had to prep for, just simply because I don't look at the draft at all during the regular season, and then I try to cram it all in a week. But also, there's just so much up in the air this year. It feels like nobody knows where anybody's going. And obviously you're a lot more well-connected, and it seems like from what you've told me that it's been like that for you as well. So why don't you just tell us a little bit about this draft and what it's been like covering it this season?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I mean, the big thing that I would take away from this is that because the talent is so flat at the top, right? There's no Victor Wembanyama. There's no, like, everyone knew Cade Cunningham was going number one the year that Cade Cunningham went number one. There's no Zion Williamson. I would argue there's not even really like a Markelle Fultz, where people felt like, Lonzo Ball and Jason Tatum in that year were pretty similar, at least, if not, in the same tier to Markelle Fultz. It was very clear that Markelle was going to go number one that year. I would argue there's not even, for instance, I do tiers in the draft guide every year, and I don't have a tier one or a tier two player. Tier one guys are like guys I expect to be all NBA players. Tier two guys are.
I noticed that. I was confused. Yeah. I was like, am I missing pages? Like, what's going on here?
Yeah. So tier two is guys that, like, I think, very realistic chance that they're all stars. It's like I thought Chet Holmgren fit into that bucket. I thought Paulo Banchero fit into that bucket, really high level. I think both those guys are probably going to exceed that at the end of the day. But, I had some questions about them in general, and I felt a little bit more confident putting them into the all-star bucket as opposed to like the definite, top 15 guys in the league, like all NBA bucket, right? I had Victor in that bucket last year. I don't have anybody in those two tiers, and I'm not like stingy with those grades. In the 4 years I've been doing the draft guide prior to this one, I've ranked 16 players with a tier one or tier two grade. Look, sometimes it works out and you have Brandon Miller with a tier two grade. Other times it doesn't work out and you have James Wiseman with a tier two grade, right? I think I had tier twos on like Anthony Edwards and LaMelo Ball that year. I think I had, I think Evan Mobley was a two. I think Jalen Green was a two. I think Suggs was a two. And I still believe in basically all those guys in some respect. But yeah, I would say that this class does not have a guy that I look at and I can confidently project all-star, like an all-star future onto them. Undeniably, just by the law of large numbers and the way that development works, once these kids get into situations, guys will emerge as all-stars. No questions asked. But when trying to find like a middle ground in terms of that evaluation and like an expected outcome, I don't know that I can like confidently tell you this specific player. Like, I have Alex Sarr at number one. I don't know if I can tell you that Alex Sarr, I am expecting a number one level of production or an all-star quality level of production for him. I think he has a chance to be that player. I think there are certainly outcomes that he can hit where he becomes that player, but I don't know that I can sit here and tell you for sure that, that's what I expect of him either. And that goes all the way through my top group of prospects. So, there will be all-stars that come out of this class. It's just going to be really hard to identify them. And I think that they're going to be maybe even a little bit more development based than what we've seen in previous years.
Yeah, that makes sense. So let me put you on the spot here. So if you had Jalen Green as a tier two prospect,
yeah,
does that mean that if Jalen Green was coming out of this class, you would have had him number one?
Not even close. Yeah.
That's super fascinating to me. And I'm not surprised because, like, obviously I went through all these guys today, and like Alex Sarr, obviously you had at number one. That was a guy. We're going to talk about Zaccharie Risacher here in a minute because he's actually the Vegas favorite to go number one, which I really want to dive into here in a minute. But as I was watching Alex, I'm like, good player, really good defensive player, doesn't feel like a number one overall pick to me, you know? And so like, that makes sense to me. And like, and to your point, like that kind of tier that you're talking about, that tier two. And I, by the way, Chet and Paolo, like they both have exceeded expectations, I would say, when they got to the NBA. They both have been better, faster than we expected. And I think that those sound properly rated to me. So like, I wanted, you had mentioned to me before we started too that you were expecting a lot of draft day trades or things surrounding the draft that involve trades. Let's get to that as we kind of go through the picks. So I want to start with number one here. So according to DraftKings, Zaccharie Risacher is the heavy favorite to go number one overall. As I was watching his film, I'm like, interesting, kind of like weak side shooter, super confident, can drive closeouts, some interesting stuff on the ball. I thought about what you talked about with me when you came on during the finals, and we talked about like the two things that you look for in terms of success for modern NBA basketball, with spacing and then ground coverage on defense. And I thought about his length, and he's pretty mobile, and he's pretty good on the weak side, like jumping passing lanes and being a help defender. But again, I don't even see the angle there over Alex Sarr. So like, what do you think is driving the intel that Zachary's going to go potentially number one overall? Do you expect that to happen? And if so, is it going to go, do you think he'll end up in Atlanta, or do you think there'll be a trade there?
Yeah. So the easiest way for me to talk about this right now is, first and foremost, I don't feel wildly confident about anything with Atlanta. And the big key with Atlanta is there are just a number of voices in that room, from what I understand. Quinn Snyder is certainly a voice in that room. You know, they convinced him to come, after he left Utah, and like they didn't convince him to come just by telling him, you're the coach and that's it, right? Like he has a voice in the room whenever it comes down to crunch time. Landry Fields certainly has a voice. There are differing degrees to which you will hear from folks that ownership and Tony Ressler and his son Nick Ressler will have a voice when it comes to it on draft night. So that creates a lot of differing incentives. It creates a lot of very challenging things for opposing teams as they're trying to get a plan for what Atlanta's trying to do to parse through. I would say that right now, look, I have Zaccharie Risacher mocked right now at number one. I know that Atlanta has certainly reached out to a few different teams. They're looking at potentially moving down the board. They're trying to figure out, is there a way we can trade down? Which makes sense, right? They're looking at a number of different options on a board where 1 through 5 or so looks pretty steady, right, in terms of talent. There are teams that have preferences in that group. There are teams that maybe have one of those guys a little bit ahead of the other, but it makes sense why you would try and trade down when all of the talent is relatively flat. The problem that I understand they're running into is like, who's going to move up in that case then? Who's trying to
who's desperate to get up?
Get to Zaccharie Risacher when, I kind of just outlined that I don't think that his likely outcome is necessarily like all-star. I think he's going to be a really good starter. I think he's going to be a guy that, like you said, like great weak side shooter. I think he can attack closeouts, but the problem is I think he struggles to maintain advantages after attacking. He's very skinny right now, so it's a big hope that he can continue to develop his frame and really get stronger despite being like kind of thinly framed. Like he doesn't have a lot like wide shoulders. He's actually like quite skinny in terms of his shoulders. So like the worry there is, how does the frame develop? Is he going to be able to actually maintain the advantages that he creates in space, in traffic? I think that he generally has struggled a little bit with contact this season. If you look at him when he's like driving to the rim and trying to finish, if he gets bumped, I think that like he kind of loses control of the ball, loses control of his touch a little bit. So I have him at number 5 personally. I really like him. And again, I have him in this top group. So anybody in that top group of players, like I'm not going to crush Atlanta for taking them because I just don't see it as all that different. But yeah, like you mentioned Alex Sarr, like I just think Sarr is bigger, covers ground a little bit better. He's definitely a worse shooter than what Risacher is. But I think that if you look at where the league is going, like these dribble pass shoot bigs are kind of worth their weight in gold. And I would just rather take an informed. This NBA draft is all about. This is the easiest way for me to explain it. This NBA draft is all about informed bets, right? You're trying to think about this in terms of bets, not in terms of, what this guy is going to be. I am trying to figure out who are my best bets in terms of the intersection of upside and like relatively high floor. I have Stephon Castle ahead of Zaccharie Risacher. I think Steph's upside is higher than Risacher because I think Steph can pass. I think that he can play through traffic. I think he's a better defender than Risacher, but undeniably his floor is lower than Risacher's because Risacher can shoot it and Steph Castle right now struggles to shoot it. If Steph Castle continues to struggle to shoot it, it's going to be a problem for Steph. But if the shot comes together, the informed bet that you're taking would be that Steph Castle is probably going to become an all-star if the shot comes together in time. So thinking about this draft almost more in terms of like bets and like informed bets. And I don't like love, it seems like dehumanizing on some level. And I don't necessarily love framing it that way, but that's the way that you almost have to think about it in terms of like investing in this class in some way.
Well, in the ruthless world of sports, that is how it works, unfortunately. Yeah. But I agree with you. It is kind of funky talking about it. I always feel like it's weird being like super micromanagey about prospects too. You're like, oh, this guy struggles with this. It's like, but he's awesome at all this other stuff. It's kind of just the weird nature of the job in so many different ways. I'm confused. So like, if Atlanta were to take Risacher, how does that clash with Jalen Johnson? Because don't they are they viewing him more as a three?
I think it's actually a good fit with Jalen Johnson for what it's worth, because Jalen, I think, is probably going to be best as like a crash and like bang athlete who runs up and down the court in transition and is physical and is, driving. I think Risacher can like help space the floor, and then you can have guys at the 3 and 4. Jalen Johnson's like this immense athlete who's, driving and trying to pass and play make and do everything that we've seen him do in his breakout season this year in his 3rd year. Risacher can be the, kind of off wing who can really knock down shots and be able to like have like high level defensive capabilities on the weak side, taking up a bunch of space with his frame and with his length. And Jalen Johnson as well is a pretty good defender. So I actually really like that fit. I do like have questions about what it would mean for somebody like DeAndre Hunter. Do they try and just move DeAndre Hunter this summer at the end of the day? I have some questions about, what it would mean for their guard room, just in general. That's another piece of this Atlanta conversation is nobody knows what they're going to do with the rest of the backcourt. Well, straight up just with the rest of their roster. Like, how are they going to get under the tax? Like, are they going to trade Clint Capella? Are they going to try and do it via the potential DeJounte Murray trade? Like, will they consider moving Trae Young if someone tried to blow them away with an offer? There's just so many different variables with the Hawks right now, and that's what makes projecting their pick hard. Folks around the league that I talk to do tend to say Risacher's name more than others, but Donovan Clingan went in there, had a great workout with Atlanta, from what I understand. Really, fits a lot of what Quinn Snyder particularly is looking for from the center position, having come from Utah, having had Rudy Gobert, who was this unbelievable screener, unbelievable drop coverage, rim protector big. I think that Quinn Snyder would do a lot of really great things with Donovan Clingan, but Donovan Clingan would not be a particularly sexy number 1 overall pick, right? As I'm sure you watched when you saw Clingan, really good player, like going to be an awesome player if he snuck like an all-star berth, kind of like how Jarrett Allen did that year in Cleveland. Would by no means surprise me, but I would say he projects as like a top 10 starting center in the league. And that's just like not something teams are wildly enthusiastic about taking at 1.
Yeah, when I had mentioned the fit, I was more meaning on the defensive end. Do you think Jalen Johnson's good enough on the ball? Because I always get worried about as someone who rooted for the Lakers last year, when you have a 3 and 4 that both suck on the ball,
Yeah.
it could be a little bit of an issue. And so that's more what I look at. Like I almost want one of my 3 or 4 to be a guy that can like fight over screens and chase
Yeah.
a shooter around or chase a ball handler around. That's the one thing. Like what I like about the Alex Sarr fit is like it makes sense. Like
Right.
you think of Jalen Johnson and Alex Sarr as kind of like this foundational kind of front court. Obviously, right now, Alex Sarr is not good enough offensively to play the 4.
Right.
I actually one of the things that one of the reasons why I'm higher on Alex, even though the shooting is obviously an issue. Well, first of all, his shooting has been making some improvements. It seems like year over year. The form isn't awful.
No.
It's not. It doesn't cause me any major concerns. And the main thing is he's really comfortable with dribble handoffs,
Yep.
which makes me think like, especially if Quinn Snyder were to kind of continue to kind of like build out more of a 5-out type of system where there's more ball and player movement, and Jalen Johnson's coming off of dribble handoffs out of, Chicago action out of the corner and stuff like that. Like I just imagine Alex Sarr being a really functional piece there. I liked the short roll reps he was getting with Bryce Cotton out in Perth too. Like just when he was just making quick decisions on the roll, like I just kind of see him as more of a shoe-in natural fit. But to your point, like what it's like if you like Zaccharie Risacher, how big of a drop off is it to like a Cody Williams as a big lanky wing that can play if you were to trade down? How big of a drop off is it to go from an Alex Sarr to a different big further down in the draft? But at the same time, if you can't actually trade down because no one else wants to trade up, then you're kind of stuck. And so, like, to me, Alex Sarr just kind of seems like a more natural fit in Atlanta. But I mean, the Vegas numbers seem pretty confident that he's going to be headed, that it's going to be Zaccharie Risacher. So if Risacher goes 1, who do you think goes number 2 to Washington?
Yeah, the name that I've gotten mostly connected there is Sarr. It feels like, that seems like where this is headed is Alex Sarr to Washington. Will Dawkins, who is now the general manager of the Washington Wizards, was the assistant general manager of the Oklahoma City Thunder prior to getting this job. Played a role in drafting Chet Holmgren. Alex Sarr certainly also repped by WME, Bill Duffy, the same agent that is represents Chet Holmgren. It's a pretty easy connection to make there in terms of, Will Dawkins, I think, wants guys that have this immense upside athletically and allows him to play a potentially interesting 5-out brand of basketball in a similar way to how Oklahoma City has built their roster. It is difficult to find centers who can dribble, pass, shoot, or at least that have potential to dribble, pass, shoot. It's part of the reason, like, we're not going to talk about this guy today, but, Kyle Filipowski seems to be a guy that's like kind of falling down boards whenever I talk to teams. Like, I don't know where his floor is on draft night quite yet, but I'm way higher on him because he's a genuine dribble, pass, shoot big man in an NBA that is like begging for those guys right now. Alex Sarr has potential to genuinely be that on offense, even if it is, trying to think about the extent to which I want to say this, quite theoretical right now at this point. The jumper, when I watched him throughout the year, I thought it had way too much offhand interaction. More than anything, he'd get like a bit of a side spin on the ball. When I saw him later in the year, he clearly had been working through cleaning that up in a real way. It looks a little bit less side spinny. And then I saw him at a pre-draft workout, and look, there was like a very, very small amount of side spin, but it was clear that like he's making that adjustment, in real time, being a teenager, kind of fixing his shot. I think he has good rhythm through the shot. I think he has very good balance for a guy. He moves like a wing. It's 7 feet tall, right? Like 7'4" wingspan. And, that ground coverage defensively is really critical. He's very comfortable dribbling with the ball in his hands. You mentioned kind of the dribble handoff game, the short roll passing that I think he's flashed, but it's all in flashes though. Right now with Alex, it's not, this is not Chet Holmgren. When Chet Holmgren came out of Gonzaga, I was like, this is the most like anticipatory big defender that I've evaluated. Like, he just doesn't have Victor's tools right? Victor is 7'4" with an 8-foot standing reach, which gives him this like immense margin for error. But like Chet's anticipation defensively is unbelievable for a guy that is 7 foot with a 7'5" wingspan. And then on offense, he was a 40% 3-point shooter at Gonzaga who could like grab and go on the break and like be functional with his balance and coordination. Like Alex isn't any of that yet, but he has potential to get to a point where he is like a 15 point, 8 rebound, 3 assists per game guy that's also a really high level defender with like all defense level upside because of how much ground he can cover on the weak side. And I think even in switch scenarios down the road.
Yeah, I love how aggressive he is in ball screens too. Like one of my biggest pet peeves watching bigs defend in ball screens. This used to always kill me with Daniel Gafford when I was scouting him, but when the Mavericks got him, where it's almost like they almost find themselves in no man's land where they're not bothering the ball handler or bothering the roll man in any way, shape, or form. Like what he gets burned for it sometimes, but I like how Alex is aggressive on the ball handler.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons why I think that could be beneficial is like, especially against certain types of teams where the guards are a little hesitant to make those passes or when they struggle to make those passes, his length being aggressive in ball screens, I think could be useful. I think he does have a pretty damn high floor, which is why it made sense to me that you had him at number 1. Like he's going to be a solid NBA center. It's just a question of whether or not he has that true upside. And obviously only time will tell. As you said, it's an informed gamble. Get ready for a night full of big fights and big action. It's UFC 303, and it can be even bigger. Jump in on all the action at DraftKings Sportsbook, the official sports betting partner of the UFC. It's super easy for first-timers to get started. Try betting on something simple like picking a fighter to win. Go to the DraftKings Sportsbook app, select your fighter, and place your first bet. It's that simple. The light heavyweight title is on the line in the main event, but there are so many more amazing matchups happening in Vegas. And speaking of amazing, if you're new to DraftKings, listen up. New customers bet $5 to get $150 in bonus bets instantly. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use code HOOPS. That's HOOPS. That's code HOOPS for new customers to get $150 in bonus bets when you bet just $5. Get that big fight feel. Only on DraftKings. DraftKings, the crown is yours. So number 2 on your big board, you had Reed Sheppard. Now, obviously, he had that rough game in the NCAA tournament, but he had just a historic shooting season at Kentucky. I was really fascinated reading in your draft guide his background and just the pedigree that he came from, and that's crazy. His dad was the most outstanding player in the NCAA tournament back in '98. Was it 98? I think. Like that's crazy.
He's Kentucky royalty. But like it's the easiest way to put it. Like he is University of Kentucky royalty. Like his dad Jeff is one of the like beloved players in the University of Kentucky's basketball history, and his mom Stacy is like one of when she retired, stopped playing at Kentucky, I think she was like one of the 10 best players in University of Kentucky history. Like it's crazy.
Yeah, I think that's what you had in the bio. She's like top 10 all time in scoring at Kentucky, which is crazy. So I view Reed in my brief little film session I did with him. I kind of view him as a guy that I think could be a really good fifth best player on a good team.
Sure.
Just because he does everything really well, functions within a team really well, just a deadly shooter from all these different ranges. He's got the ability to get shots off from every kind of footwork. Like he can hop into it, he can left right, he can right left, he can come off the move, he can go off the bounce. Like there's so much that he can do creatively. A little bit of Austin Reeves in there with some of the creative rise and fire stuff from the 15 to 18 foot range. Where do you want him to go? Where do you expect him to end up?
Yeah, so I like the idea of him in Houston personally. When I look at that young Houston core, I see Amen Thompson, Jabari Smith, Jalen Green, Tari Eason, Cam Whitmore certainly I think deserves to be mentioned in that group. And then Alperen Şengün, of course, is like their, center that, could be an all-star as soon as next season. The one thing that I think they're missing there is like a super high level shooter at the end of the day. Getting Reed to like operate and dribble handoffs with Alperen Şengün, like that would be disgusting to me. I also think Reed like really fits well with Amen Thompson in terms of like having that secondary playmaker out there if you want to try and make a man a point guard, which is what he was drafted as, even though this year he played kind of more on the wing and like even in the front court at times after Şengün went down. I think that Reed just makes a ton of sense for them as like a connector and is the kind of guy that helps you win. I think that his anticipation defensively is just like outstanding. He has physical tools that are very limiting. He is 6'1", not super long in terms of his arm length or anything. I think he has like a 6'3", 6'4" wingspan, something like that. But he blocks shots. He has a 40-inch vertical leap, and he blocked like 0.7 shots this year, which is a crazy number for a guy that measured in just under 6'2". He is somebody that like really scrambles well on the back line defensively. Like he makes these crazy like scramble reads where he'll just like force steals at a super high level. And one thing that like I've watched a lot of recently, and we'll talk about this when we talk about Devin Carter too. I know that you are a fan of after watching his tape. The degree to which you can space the court, not just in terms of percentage, but in terms of how far away you can actually shoot from. That is really important to me, if only because if you don't have these immense athletic tools or an immense bag of like tricks where you're crossing dudes up, I think that being able to shoot from 30 feet is kind of a differentiator because it gives you so much more space to operate away from help defense. If you can change pace and you can shoot from 30 feet, it's just hard to stay in front of guys, just point blank at this point in the NBA. Reed made 50% of his threes from beyond, what is the number here I have? From beyond 27 feet this year. So like,
that's crazy.
I kind of think that you're going to have to account for him in such a real way. It's kind of like Tyrese Halliburton, right? Tyrese Halliburton has that kind of funky load into his shot. So what did he do? He just learned how to shoot from 30 feet at the end of the day. And that's how he became so valuable as like a floor spacer, and then allowed him to use his passing ability and take advantage and really get into the teeth of the defense and spray the ball out. I'm not saying that Reed is that as a passer. I don't think he is. I think Reed's the best transition passer in this draft class. But in terms of like half court reads, I think he's still figuring it out. But I also think that like that shooting gravity gives him way more upside than what people are thinking in this class when mixed with the fact that he can also handle the ball.
I like the Houston fit a lot too, just because I imagine with them playing a lot with pace and with all their athletes in transition, I loved watching his footage at Kentucky operating in transition where like everyone's kind of scattered. And that's when he can really get into some nifty footwork and dribble combinations and to pull up 3-point shots. And I just imagine defenses reacting to him there and then just athletes running around him and him being able to find those reads. I enjoyed watching him today.
Or
Stephon
even,
Castle,
even better with that real quick. Or Amen Thompson like sprints down the court all the way, and then you've just got Reed Sheppard like trailing and spraying out to the wings, right? Like it's really synergistic in the way it would work, I think.
Yeah, the 30-footers too are great when you get to be old like me. That's how you play lazy basketball. You're 6'6" and you shoot 30-foot 3-point shots, and you don't have to worry about landing on someone's ankle. Okay, so Stephon Castle from UConn. Famously was being left wide open in the tournament, but making him pay, hit a couple of them. I really enjoyed watching him too. It's there were some fun players. I enjoyed watching. There's some fun players in this draft. To me, Stephon Castle kind of reminds me of like a bigger version of Jalen Hood-Schifino, if that makes sense, in the sense that like he's very, it's very
that seems sad.
Pace heavy. I know. But you got to remember, like that burned me too. It's a whole other thing. But what I mean by that is like he reminded me of Jalen Hood-Schifino when I was scouting him last year, where it's like the jumper's the big question mark, more of like a power, methodical, put you in jail, kind of operate from the short range kind of area. Deadly hook and floater, short jump shot, that sort of thing, but just a way better version of him. And the main reason why I think his footwork is better, and I think he's got more counter moves in that short to mid range that allows him to operate. And like, honestly, like I didn't see anything with his jump shot. He's a little down in front of the face, a little bit of a long load, but I think that can be worked out in time. I'm pretty high on Stephon Castle. I saw you had him way up at third on your list. Where do you see him ending up?
I'm really glad that you brought up the shot because you mentioned that like he has like the load up here and then like it comes up and it's kind of a funky shot and he has like a little bit of a hitch kind of at the top. I think that that's mostly when he's kind of going to his left. I think when he's going to his left, because like most right-handed shooters, right, just more comfortable stepping back to their left or kind of, drifting to their left a little bit, just helps them get into rhythm a little bit easier. But with him, what I see is he drifts a little bit too far to his left. And I think it kind of like throws off his like center of balance and everything. And I think the shot's a little bit hitchier. When he's going to his right, he tends to take those shots off the hop. And I think that like it just looks way cleaner. And I think that everything like kind of tracks a little bit easier. And if I was an organization kind of working through his shot, like I would love to just, kind of with his shot prep and like, getting into the shot and his load into it, just like start having him take things off the hop a little bit more. Like he tends to 1-2 step from the left side, take it off the hop in the right. Like I just think it looks cleaner going off the hop. But in terms of where I see him going, San Antonio's been connected with him, for a while now, for a couple of months. It feels like that is a situation that everyone would be like pretty amenable to in terms of both San Antonio and Castle's camp. If there was somebody who fell to number 4, like if Reed Sheppard got there, I think it would be a question. If Risacher got to 4, I think it'd be a real question. But and then I think the Castle would very likely probably go 6 at the latest. Maybe 8 would be the latest, let's say, because I would be surprised if he would get beyond the San Antonio second pick at number 8, right? But if somewhere in that 4 to 8 range, I would say is where Steph will end up. I think that you kind of hit the nail on the head in terms of what the offense is. I think he's a really sharp passer. If you'd even go back to his high school stuff, you can see some like really impressive ball screen reps utilizing his passing ability where he'd hit skip passes pretty well. And he'd be able to really, really be able to get downhill out of that screen and maintain that advantage, kind of like you mentioned, keeping guys in jail kind of on his hip and everything. The big question is the shot, though. And the other thing I will say is I don't know if I think of him as an all defense level defender, but I think of him as this incredible chess piece defender who is kind of above average at doing every assignment on defense. Like they had him in the tournament guard, Mark Sears, who was an All-American point guard at the point of attack and just make his life miserable. They had him guard Purdue's point guard, Braden Smith. Throughout the season, they would have him like chase Baylor Shireman, another potential first-round pick this year, off of screens because, Creighton just ran Baylor off of screens constantly. They would have him guard like true off guards, like scoring guards and things like that, as opposed to wings. I think he can guard 4s with how physical and strong he is. There's just a lot of versatility in what his role can be on defense. And I think that particularly in San Antonio, it would be really valuable to have somebody like that next to Victor Wembanyama, next to Devin Vassell particularly as well, because Vassell looked like a guy who was going to be a really good defender coming out of Florida State, and it just hasn't really happened at this point for him in the NBA. I would love to get somebody like Steph Castle in there that can like just take on a lot of different assignments. And, hopefully the offensive game just continues to grow and develop.
So we're going to move to a little bit more of a rapid fire format here because as usual, Sam, we just have a tendency to go for a very long time.
Yeah, what a shame.
and
it's so funny. You complained. No, you didn't complain. You were like, thank you so much for coming and doing this. Thank you. Like, I know it's crazy busy. I'm just like, Jason, I love doing this. Like, this is great. These are like some of my favorite conversations that I do is with you and like thinking about the game in different ways. It was just like very funny.
Complaining in our profession is always relative. That's always something we have to keep in mind. But I want to get to a bunch of additional players, and I want to get to Bronny in the next 16 minutes. So we're going to go a little bit more rapid fire here, really quickly. Really quickly, when you talk to people from San Antonio, when you do some digging on that front, what would be their dream outcome for getting 4 and 8? Who would be their dream outcome there?
So I think that their dream outcome would be finding a way to get Risacher and Castle. If they could find a way to move up and get 4 and 5 or 3 and 4 in some way. If they could figure out a way to do that, I think they'd be really happy on draft night. I think it'll be a little bit difficult, but that would be my guess in terms of how they foresee a win, especially if Risacher goes one. I think it'd be a little bit difficult to do that.
Yeah, I really enjoyed Stephon Castle. Like he just, no matter how big the game was, no matter how big the situation was, he just never got sped up. He just was always kind of playing at his own pace. He was fun to watch. Donovan Clingan, I like a lot of stuff with him. I love how he functions in that UConn offense, just as like a really good. You talked a lot about his screening in the draft guide that you did, but I also think he has got a really good instinct for when to slip.
Yeah,
like he always can. He always just kind of has his eye on when his defender's showing, and as soon as his defender decides to show, he just doesn't even bother setting the screen anymore. He just gets out of there, and then like he's got good hands. He finishes most of his catches around the basket. The one thing that freaks me out with him is I worry about him being a little bit matchup dependent because I don't think he's quick-footed enough to guard in space. Yeah. What's your take on Donovan Clingan?
No, I agree with all of that. I think he's like pure drop coverage is a big. What I will say is generally, in terms of the scouting, I think you really nailed what he is. It's not a complicated evaluation. He's just an elite level drop coverage big man, an elite level rim protector, great finisher at the basket. The thing I will throw on is he's a really good high post passer and like passer in terms of he can run dribble handoffs, deny dribble handoff, find a cutter like at a super, super high level. He manipulates defenders already. Really good at that. But if he gets down to like the 3 to 6 range on draft night, there are a bunch of teams. So like the 3 to 6 range, the Rockets have Şengün, the Hornets have Mark Williams, the Pistons have Jalen Duren, and then 4 is San Antonio. They have Victor Wembanyama, right? So like those teams don't need a center in theory, right? There are a number of teams in the like 7 to 12 range or so, let's call it 7 to 11 range. I'd throw Oklahoma City in, I guess, that have like a real degree of interest in him. And that's kind of the one that I'm targeting. Like if I'm Memphis in particular, right? Like that's my favorite fit in this draft would be Memphis ending up on draft night with Donovan Clingan. Maybe if he falls to 5, they trade a future first round pick in number 9 to move up to number 5 to assure themselves Donovan Clingan, who would be this incredible fit within their scheme, setting screens for John Morant, being the drop coverage defender to let Jaren roam on the backside defensively. But if Donovan Clingan gets into that 3 to 6 range, look for somebody to move up to get him, in my opinion, because if you hear, as I hear things from teams, it seems like there's a lot of interest in him in that like 7 to 12 range. And I think somebody will try and spike up to grab him.
That's super interesting. So you're saying these front offices basically have like a bunch of game plans that are contingent on on who's going where. So if this guy slips, then we're prepared to trade up if in the event that happens. I really like the Clingan fit with Memphis as well. I think they're rangy enough around him. I don't think people realize yet how good Gigi Jackson is too, and just slot it. If they get a legit center and it's Morant, Bane, Jackson, and then Jaren Jackson, and then a legit center like that, I think they're going to be right back in the mix at the top of the conference next year, especially as a regular season team with all their youthful exuberance.
They have Marcus Smart too. Like that's the other thing. Like Marcus Smart's like,
yeah, they have Marcus Smart.
Like Gigi Jackson. Like I want to see where it goes with Gigi Jackson. Like I'm really interested in like if I was redrafting last year, I think I would have Gigi like in the top 7 of that class, like point blank. But next year, like Marcus is going to be the guy that's like really valuable for them, and like we'll see what Gigi looks like. It's where I'm at.
Mm-hmm. Well, and then also there's that they would inevitably have to have a small ball look anyway, totally. Where you can imagine Gigi being the 4 next to Jaren Jackson. Now you and I are admittedly biased on the Williams family. I think you and I might be the 2 biggest Jalen Williams fans in the world. Although I did almost get in trouble with Sam the other day on the phone because I told him that I thought that Jalen Williams has potential to be better than Shea, and Sam had to quickly put me in my place.
Cody Williams, I did that. I was just like, oh wow, like, I was taken aback by the degree of the take.
I love Jalen Williams. So obviously, it's kind of funny. There's a little bit of Jalen in Cody's game. Mainly the pull-up jump shot footwork looks similar in the sense that they both look really good going left. They have that same right-left footwork where they both kind of lean back a little bit. But Cody just has this like a totally different look to him because he's like lanky and a little bit taller, a little bit skinnier. Tell us a little bit about Cody Williams and where you want him to end up.
Yeah, I think he really is kind of like when Jalen was that young, Jalen was still he was shorter actually. Like when he committed to Santa Clara as a senior, he was, I want to say like 6'3" or so. Like honestly, might have been like 6'2", and then like grew before he got to Santa Clara, and then kept growing all the way up to like 6'4.5". I think he is without shoes now, but has that enormous 7'2" wingspan. Cody is 6'7", 7'1" wingspan, so big and long, just very skinny, and is continuing to grow into his frame. I think that the footwork as a driver is where I see the similarities. I think that a lot of that looks quite similar. I'm glad you brought up the pull-up game because, Cody's pull-up game is definitely still developing, I would say. Didn't take a ton of pull-up jumpers in high school where he went to, I think, Perry down in your neck of the woods in Arizona. Just a really, really good upside bet, I think, is a wing that could be like a playmaker. I think he passes really well. I would like to see him be like a little bit more disruptive defensively, but I think he can get there just with his length and with his physical tools. So I look at what Cody Williams has, and I ended up with him 6 on my board. You mentioned the Risacher comparison earlier in the show. I have them literally 5 and 6, so I don't see an enormous difference between the two of those players. They're different types, but I quite like Cody Williams as well.
That's, I think, a good indicator of this draft right there. Is Risacher might end up going number 1, and like, yeah, Cody's not a perfect corollary. They play a different style, but they're two lanky wings, right? That you like. I think obviously Risacher is a much better shooter at this point. But Cody shot well in catch and shoot situations, it seemed like, when I was looking into it today. All right, we have 3 more quick players that we're going to get through. First, probably the guy that I had the most fun watching today, Devin Carter out of Providence. I really thought it was fascinating. He was seeing really aggressive coverages, which I'm assuming had a lot to do with the roster that he was playing with. But it seemed like towards the tail end of the season, his playmaking was improving after struggling with it a little bit to start the year. But freaky athletic, really good scorer. Just I thought his motor really impressed me. Just in general, he just seemed like a foxhole type of dude, a guard that I'd love to have competing alongside me. So tell us about Devin Carter and where you hope to see him end up.
Yeah. Kind of a very different players, but like a Derek White, kind of starter kit to me. Devin, I think, is the best athlete in the class. Just kind of, I keep saying point blank, but point blank. He is a 40-inch vertical leap guy. He is, any combine test you put him through, he's going to win. I think he literally won almost all of the combine testing. And he's not one of those guys where it's not functional. It shows up all over his tape. He blocks 1 shot per game. He gets into passing lanes and, creates transition opportunities. He had 30 half court dunks or something this year at 6'2" with a 6'9".
I couldn't believe it.
He is a serious leaper. And then the big thing is what is the handle, right? It's a lot of straight line stuff, a lot of trying to change pace. How he started to account for that this year was he just started moving back and taking deeper threes, right? If teams were going to collapse down on him whenever he shot, okay, I'm just going to take 27-foot threes, right? That's the big question with Devin. His first 2 years in college, one at South Carolina, one at Providence, which is where he ended up this year as well, made 27% from 3. This year got way better, way up to the volume, was at 38% or so from 3 on 7 3-point attempts per game, a lot of pull-up shots, a lot of contested shots. The thing I love about Devin, though, is I've seen him work out. I've talked to people about him. Everything that you see on tape in terms of why you love him being a foxhole guy, it's who he is off the court. Incredible work ethic, great competitor. All of the boxes get ticked there. I ended up with him at 7. I'm probably the highest person in the public sphere on him. I've talked to teams that are higher on him than that, honestly. So, I love Devin Carter.
Yeah, it's kind of reminds me of the JJ Redick conversation. Obviously, it's different from a coach, but it's give me a super competitive dude who loves basketball and has the natural talent, understanding of the game. I just feel like they're going to find a way to figure it out. That's the kind of the way I feel with Devin Carter. It's like super competitive, loves the game, relentless worker, and elite athletic tools. Like that just automatically to me makes you a super interesting player and a guy that I'd be willing to take a bet on. All right, two more quick ones. Dalton Knecht out of Tennessee. You and I talked a lot about him during the tournament this year.
The JUCO brethren.
The JUCO brethren. I know. This is Dalton's like the much better version of me. He's like what I would have been like if I was way better at basketball. Similar kind of to height, like 6'5.5" without shoes on, 6'10" wingspan, kind of a score first mentality. Really showed some high level shot making in the NCAA tournament. What do you kind of see him looking like as an NBA player? Where do you like to see him end up?
Plug and play shooter for sure. Really needs to improve on defense. In terms of hitting like top 10 upside, I would like to see him land in a scheme where like he'll run off of all of that like floppy stuff that Tennessee would run him off of all sort of like flares and try to get him shots early in offense. To me, that's where he'll hit like a real ceiling. But regardless of where he goes, he's going to knock down shots and he's going to be valuable, I think.
So we absolutely have to, per our agreement as NBA media members, discuss Bronny James.
Yeah.
And I obviously have not watched him nearly as closely as you have. So why don't you just give us just your pure, unadulterated, unbiased perspective on what Bronny James looks? Because important little disclaimer here, like I don't give a shit about the nepotism angle. Like he's gonna get his opportunity. He's gonna get several years to figure out whether or not he's an NBA player. So like everyone just needs to accept that. That's the reality. He's gonna get his shot. Yeah. The question is, if he gets 2-3 years in an NBA organization to try to figure this out, what NBA level tools does he have? And is there a realistic shot for him to round out into an NBA player eventually?
So the idea behind Bronny James is like a 3-and-D guard, not like a 3-and-D wing. He's like 6'1.5", right? So he is a guard. The names that will come up are Gary Harris and Avery Bradley. Like those are the two most popular names I've heard from teams and if they like him or like anybody that's like trying to figure out a point of comparison. I don't think people quite understand how good those guys were in high school and college. Both of those guys were 5-star recruits coming out of high school. Avery Bradley, a top 5 kid in his class. Gary Harris was like, a top 20 kid in his class. Gary Harris eventually went on. I think he won Big Ten Player of the Year. If he didn't win Big Ten Player of the Year, he was first team All Big Ten. Was like an outstanding player over multiple years at Michigan State. Top 20 pick, was fantastic. Became this awesome 3-and-D guard, like who could guard even up to the 3 eventually. Avery Bradley was a guy that averaged like 11 3-and-3 in his freshman year at Texas, or maybe like 11 5-and-3. And was by the end of his year at Texas, one of like the great perimeter defenders in college basketball. Like he was a monster at the point of attack, which is why he ended up going in the top 20. Bronny was I thought a good defender this year for a freshman. I didn't feel like he was particularly crazily disruptive anywhere. I would say defense was his best attribute this season as a basketball player. And we really wouldn't be having this conversation if it wasn't for LeBron being involved. I kind of have gone back in terms of the production.
I'm gonna cut you off really quickly here. Yeah. Just how much do you think? Let me play devil's advocate.
Yeah.
Kid had heart surgery before the season.
Totally.
Doesn't that have a substantial impact on what his USC film / statistical production would look like?
I think it has an impact for sure. My issue with Bronny has kind of always been though that I've never seen him as like a half court shot creator at all. I've always seen him. He's pretty good in transition. I think he makes like pretty solid passing reads. I think he's smart and like understands the game at an intuitive level in a way you would expect from LeBron's child, right? Just the genetics that kind of filter down, whatever it is. Like, I think he sees the game in the open court in a really positive way. It's just really hard for me to envision a player that averaged, under 5 points per game as a freshman at 6'1", being a draft prospect. Like I've kind of gone back through, but like back to like 2007, 2008, like something like that. Uh, I believe Bronny James will be the first player drafted that is like under 6'2" and averaged under 5 points per game as a one and done player. It's just an extremely uncommon degree of production and size to be entering the NBA draft. Now, you and I just talked about how much we love Devin Carter and like we truly like adore that guy's game. I think that there are outcomes where if Bronny had stayed in college for a couple of years, we could have been looking at Bronny as a similar player to Devin Carter because Devin Carter started at South Carolina, averaged like 7 points per game, 8 points per game, whatever, first year. Moved up to Providence, averaged 14 points a game, and 6 rebounds or so. And then this year was, 20 points, 8 rebounds, 4 assists, like was one of the best players in the country. You could have convinced me of that pathway, but where I'm worried now about Bronny is I don't think he can play point guard in the G League unless they force it. Like if they might force the issue, like let's just be honest about it. So I'm worried about him getting reps, being able to develop his ball handling and develop his half court feel as a playmaker in the way that would allow him to get the most out of his game long term. Maybe he will, maybe he won't. I wish the best for the kid, obviously. Like the kid has gone through a crazy number of difficult situations between the heart condition, the pressure that's on him as LeBron James's kid, the fact that he seemingly is as well adjusted as he is, and like everybody will kind of tell you he is quite well adjusted. And I've been in like media scrums with him before. He seems like a really, really nice dude. And like a mature beyond his years in some way, like teenager. But like at some level, like the game is the game, right? And you got to be able to prove it. Like everyone talks about like Tony Allen, right? Tony Allen's, more our age ish, right? Do you remember how good Tony Allen was at Oklahoma State, Jason?
Oh my God.
Tony Allen won the Big 12 Player of the Year. He won the Big 12 tournament MVP. He led Oklahoma State to a 31-4 record and led them to the Final Four. And that guy, like Boston, like tried to make him point guard for a minute or whatever, but he eventually settled in as like one of the great defensive players in the league. And that's the vision that people have for Bronny. And there's just like to me, like I just don't know what the backing for that is based on what we've seen so far, is maybe the fairest way to put it, but maybe he can get there.
Do you think this was a strategic move on the family and Clutch Sports part to capitalize on more of the intrigue around him, knowing, because like here's the thing, I would imagine he'd actually make more money going back to USC in NIL deals, so, or at least close. So like, do you think they're actually trying to avoid him putting more college tape out there that kind of dampens or kind of like minimizes some of the intrigue surrounding his potential?
I think that everything about this has been strategic from Clutch. Like I've never heard an agent be more public about the way he's handling a prospect than Rich Paul has been with Bronny James at this point.
Yeah.
And to me, all of that is very strategic. Like coming out and saying that he won't take a two-way is trying to drive him down the board at the end of the day, because if you're trying to stop other teams from taking him, coming out and saying that he'll only work out certain places, that's trying to drive him to a specific situation. So I think the whole thing has been trying to control the process, drive him to specific situations. Let's be honest, like it seems like the Lakers. I'm not going to sit here and say like for sure it's the Lakers, but the way Rich Paul is handling this process is exactly the way you would handle it if your goal was to get him to a specific destination, without saying that is 100% the goal and that I know that's 100% the goal. Everything he has done has been acting like that is the goal, at least, let's say. So like, and I respect it. Like, I understand the goal. I understand everything about it. In terms of like making more NIL, less on NIL, if he just stayed in school. My the most popular college that I got for Bronny, because he did enter the transfer portal, so colleges, kind of had a sense of what was going on. The most popular name, I'm not saying he would have gone there. I'm just saying the most popular idea I got for Bronny James was for him to go to Duquesne, which is where Drew Joyce just got the head coaching job. Drew Joyce played high school basketball with LeBron at St. Vincent St. Mary's. His dad, I believe Drew Joyce senior or the second, I can't remember if Drew coaching Duquesne now is the third or not, was a coach at St. Vincent St. Mary's, for LeBron. And then Drew Joyce, who just took the Duquesne job, was the head coach, or was an assistant coach under Keith Dambrot, who was LeBron's head coach also at St. Vincent St. Mary's early in his career. So there were a lot of familial connections where if you're going to send Bronny somewhere, it would be very comfortable, right? That's a place where that Bronny will be treated well, where that he'll get every opportunity to succeed. And honestly, like in the A10 level, I think that'd be great for Bronny to get a chance to like thrive and get a chance to play on the ball and showcase what he's capable of. But ultimately they decided to go a different way, and I respect it. I just have concerns as to whether or not it was what was best for his development, because the G League is a higher level of basketball at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm. It's going to be very sink or swim for him, for sure. And again, my last take on it again is like, I hate when people complain about the nepotism, because guess what? Nepotism has existed in every single field for as long as I can possibly remember. It's not even the first time it's happened in the NBA. Like, big who cares? He's going to benefit from it. He's going to get a lot of opportunity as a result of it. But guess what? No good coach is going to put him on an NBA floor in a meaningful basketball game if he doesn't earn his opportunity to be there. So like at a certain point, like we opened the show with it. Like this is the nature of the ruthlessness of professional sports. He might have his opportunity to grow and to learn on the fringes of the NBA, but like no one's going to just hand him a starting role on a legitimate NBA team. He's going to have to earn it. He's just going to get an opportunity by virtue of this. But that is all we have time for today. Sam, can you please just tell everybody how to find your draft guide, how to find your other NBA draft content? I think I can't even tell you how much it helped me today in my crash course on this NBA draft to just as a reference as I was going through film. Like it just was such an incredible product, and I want you to shout it out to everybody so we can get as many people over there as possible.
We have a testimonial. Go to The Athletic, where the draft guide is up. It's like 130,000 words on the 75 best prospects in this class, according to me at least. You'll be able to read about their backgrounds a little bit, get more of an understanding of where they come from, understand their strengths, their weaknesses, and kind of where I stand on them as prospects. Go to the Game Theory YouTube channel. I have interviewed like 8 or 9 or 10 of these kids, where you'll be able to watch film of me breaking down film with them, right? Today, I released Donovan Clingan, right? Donovan was super fun. He's like this awesome kid, really good personality. Tomorrow, I'll release Tristan da Silva, who's like one of the most mature and like super high IQ basketball players I've gotten a chance to talk to as a player rising from college to the NBA. So go to the Game Theory podcast with Sam Vecenie YouTube channel. You'll see all that. And look, I'll be going live for the draft, so I'm excited to kind of run through it and talk through it all with you guys.
Yeah, I know you're sick of me telling you thank you, but thank you again for making the time to do this for us today.
We might as well record
that's
it,
all
Jason. We might as well record it, right? Because we're going to do it anyway over the phone. So let's just get a product out there in the content space, right?
Exactly. Might as well have it help our jobs a little bit. All right, guys, that is all we have for today. Tomorrow I am recording a video on the 5 biggest takeaways from this postseason, which is also going to feature some of the things that Sam and I have talked about over the course of the last few weeks. And then obviously we'll be reacting to the draft on Thursday morning. As always, I sincerely appreciate you guys for supporting the show, and we'll see you tomorrow.